74 years before the Common Era. Capua. The scorching sand of the arena soaks up sticky sweat and the thick scent of fresh blood. The roar of tens of thousands of spectators crashes against eardrums harder than any physical blow. The heat melts the air as yet another merciless slaughter unfolds in the center of the amphitheater. Here, a handful of doomed slaves would become the most terrifying threat Rome had ever faced. We'll grasp the true scale of the gladiator uprising and encounter the brilliant strategy of a man who shook the greatest empire of the ancient world to its core. This bloody dance on the sand was never just brutal entertainment. Every swing of a heavy sword, every dying breath was a carefully calculated political move. Roman senators had long learned the key rule of power. The hungry crowd's loyalty isn't won through complex reforms, but through raw spectacle. Gladiator fights became the perfect tool for controlling the masses, distracting citizens from poverty and ongoing crises. While the plebeians drank in the death of others, they praised emperors and patricians. The fighters in the arena were nothing more than faceless pawns in a grand game of power, cheap expendables in the state's relentless machine. Among this doomed cannon fodder, one man stood apart. His name would soon haunt the Senate: Spartacus. A Thracian by birth, he was nothing like the typical slaves captured from wild tribes. The Romans made a fatal, unforgivable mistake when they sent him to the Ludus, an elite gladiator school. This hardened warrior had once served in auxiliary Roman troops. Spartacus didn't just know how to wield a weapon. He understood his oppressor's system inside and out. His mind scanned the world around him with the cold calculation of a seasoned general. He knew how legions were organized, how centurions issued orders, how the ruthless, disciplined Roman war machine operated. Watching the overseer's training, he saw not chaotic fighting, but precise algorithms of attack and defense. His own combat skill was mesmerizing, a perfect harmony of body, lightning-fast strikes that pierced any armor, and an impeccable sense of distance. It was this deep grasp of Roman tactics, earned in the enemy's service, that gave Spartacus the key to victory where others saw only a sure path to a nameless grave. Official Roman chronicles often smoothed over the truth, portraying gladiators as ancient superstars basking in the glow of fame. But the real story stayed buried beneath layers of time, until modern archaeologists uncovered mass graves filled with fighters. Their findings gave a chilling, undeniable answer to the mystery of gladiators' daily lives. Bones don't lie. Scientists found hundreds of healed skull fractures, deep marks from heavy-bladed wounds on ribs, and grotesquely deformed joints. Chemical analysis of the remains revealed a meager diet of barley and ash, designed only to build cheap fat, just enough to protect internal organs from shallow cuts. Their bodies formed a living map of relentless pain and injury. Life in the dark underground cells of Capua was soaked in absolute hopelessness, and the sadistic cruelty of the overseers. Cells barely larger than stone coffins, constant cold seeping in at night, heavy iron shackles that wore skin down to the bone with every step. This unbearable, suffocating environment didn't break the strongest spirits, it only wound tighter the spring of primal human fury. They were dead in the eyes of the law and society, turned into living weapons with no right to a future. On a silent night, when the roar of the crowds faded, and the only sounds in the corridors were the clinking of chains and the footsteps of patrols, a conspiracy began to take shape in the damp cells of Ludus Batiatus. 70 men, bound by icy despair and guided by Spartacus's sharp mind, grasped one simple truth. To surrender their lives to the crowd of patricians was the fate of obedient cattle. They chose instead to die free with weapons in their hands. The plan sounded like sheer madness. Break through a professional armed guard using only kitchen spits, knives, and heavy wooden blocks. They had to fight their way beyond the towering walls of Capua and vanish into the steep slopes of the sleeping volcano Vesuvius. The Roman elite in the capital slept soundly on their silk sheets, unaware that at this very moment a handful of fighters prepared to ignite a fire that would almost consume the Republic entirely. But how could a ragtag group of exhausted fugitives hope to destroy a regular pursuit force armed with nothing but wild terrain and grapevines? Broken doors and a cramped kitchen sparked the greatest uprising of ancient times. 70 desperate men broke into the cobblestone streets, gripping not gleaming gladii but rusty spits, heavy butcher's cleavers, and iron hooks. Against the gleaming armor of invincible legions, capable of wiping entire nations off the map, this makeshift arsenal looked pitiful. Yet, in the hands of those with nothing left to lose, Even a kitchen knife becomes a weapon of revenge. The fugitives carved their way through stunned city guards, leaving a trail of blood and growing panic in their wake. They weren't just fighting to save their own skins. They openly challenged a system that had ground millions of lives to dust for centuries. Bursting through massive city gates, this tiny band faced the Republic's colossal war machine alone, with no food supplies and not a hint of a retreat plan. The only refuge they had was the summit of Vesuvius. Back then, this mountain seemed completely safe. A peaceful height, covered thick with wild grapevines and thorny bushes. Its slopes dropped off into sheer cliffs, turning the crater into a natural fortress, nearly impossible to breach. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, while the cold night wind cut through their exhausted bodies to the bone. The rebels set up camp right at the top, fully aware of how dire their situation was. They had no tents, no warm clothing, and no reliable source of drinking water. This natural citadel offered a brief respite, but it also became a massive stone trap. Climbing down meant certain death by sword blows. Staying on the peak meant a slow death from thirst. The Senate met this bold defiance with irritated contempt. They assigned Praetor Claudius Glaber to crush the revolt, hastily assembling a militia of 3,000 soldiers. The city's elite didn't even bother sending their seasoned, battle-hardened troops against a band of former slaves. Glaber reached the foot of the volcano and made the classic mistake of an overconfident commander. He surveyed the rugged terrain, then blocked the only gentle path down and ordered his men to set up a comfortable fortified camp. The praetor planned to starve out the rebels basking in the warm Campanian sun, waiting for hunger to force them to crawl on their knees. His 3,000-strong force grew complacent, failing to guard the cliffs. Terrain Roman military doctrine declared utterly impassable to humans. But it was the enemy's arrogant blindness that became the uprising leader's greatest advantage. Instead of waiting passively for a dishonorable defeat, the Thracian fixed his gaze on the thick wild vines hanging over the black chasm. From these flexible, incredibly strong stems, the people began weaving long ropes, working in complete silence under the cover of a moonless night. The plan demanded superhuman endurance and nerves of steel. One by one, gripping the homemade ropes with fingers worn raw and bleeding, the fighters slid down the sheer rock face into the abyss. The darkness swallowed the cliff's bottom entirely. Any slip meant falling onto sharp stones below. This descent seemed to defy the laws of physics and common sense. Yet, icy desperation pushed them onward, forging a ragged band of outcasts into a single, silent mechanism gliding through the shadows. At the foot of the mountain, the squad struck with lightning speed, targeting the completely unguarded rear of the Roman camp. Glabrus's soldiers, sleepy and disoriented, couldn't believe their eyes when a fierce wave of attackers surged out of the darkness. Panic paralyzed 3,000 legionnaires in an instant. They fled in disgrace, abandoning their commander, proud standards, and vast stores of weapons. This astonishing victory, won through pure cunning and wild risk, shattered the myth of Roman invincibility forever. News of the triumph at Vesuvius spread across Italy like wildfire, lifting the spirits of thousands shackled in chains. Sparks landed on the dry grass of slave anger, and now fugitives, shepherds, and ruined peasants swarmed around their victorious leader. But how do you transform this ragtag, enraged crowd into a disciplined army, united by a new idea of equality? The southern plains of Campania lie buried under a thick layer of gray dust, kicked up by tens of thousands of bare feet. From every corner of the peninsula, a relentless stream of people with shattered lives flows into the rebel camp. Weather-beaten shepherds, Thracian laborers worn thin by endless toil, Gauls marked with branded scars, they all share one thing: a burning thirst for immediate vengeance. Yesterday's prisoners carry with them a rage forged over decades of humiliation. The camp hums with a cacophony of dozens of languages. The air smells of sour sweat, smoke from campfires, and raw meat. Yet, beneath this boiling mass lurks a deadly threat to the rebellion itself. This uncontrolled, starving crowd, deaf to the orders of their neighbors, can only erupt into chaotic riots, not wage a sustained war. The Senate's regular legions would crush such a ragtag mob within weeks. No amount of pleading could tame this volcano of fury. Their leader faced an impossible task: to forge these scattered avengers into a single, flawlessly operating military machine. The decision was brilliant precisely because of its irony. A former slave took the very system that had oppressed his people for centuries, the strict structure of the Republic's legions, and made it his foundation. The unruly mass broke down into tight-knit groups called contubernia, squads of 10 sharing a single marching tent. 8 men ate their meager rations together, slept on damp ground, and marched into battle, covering each other with captured shields. But this rigid framework carried a completely new, revolutionary meaning. Within each unit, an ironclad law of absolute equality ruled. Every piece of captured loot, from gold sestertii to sacks of wheat, divided evenly among all members of the campaign. Any hint of hiding loot or robbing civilians meant an immediate death sentence, carried out right before the entire unit. This harsh code crushed all internal conflict, turning strangers into brothers bound by blood. Meanwhile, the camp never slept. The steady hammering of metal on anvils echoed nonstop. Hundreds of makeshift forges transformed symbols of captivity into weapons of revenge. Blazing hot shackles, heavy chain links, and iron bars from prison gates melted down and reforged into deadly blades and sharp spear tips. News of this harsh yet unyielding justice raced ahead of the marching columns. Before long, the rebel army swelled to an astonishing 70,000 men. This was no longer a scattered band of forest bandits. Now, a formidable organized force moved along Italy's stone-paved roads, one capable of laying siege to fortified cities. Inside their ranks, a chilling discipline took hold, not born from fear of the overseer's whip, but from a shared sense of a greater purpose. For the first time, these outcasts felt true human dignity, stepping in perfect unison beneath their own banners. Their leader's name echoed through the marble halls of the capital, not with the usual arrogance, but with a chilling dread. The Roman elite trembled as they faced a stark reality. Their enemy was no wild horde. It was a mirror image of their own unbeatable machine, stripped of political corruption and cowardice. But the most devastating blow to the Empire's pride didn't come from razor-sharp steel alone. After yet another brutal defeat of the punitive forces, the victors refused to mock the fallen enemy. Instead, they held solemn funerals for the dead legionnaires, honoring them with full military rites and lighting pyres according to the ancient world's traditions. This remarkable gesture showcased overwhelming moral superiority over their former masters. The rebels sent a clear message to the civilized world. They were not the savage beast propaganda portrayed them to be. They were true warriors, respectful of the valor of a fallen foe. This psychological victory shattered the Republic's confidence for good. It seemed nothing could stop the relentless storm sweeping through the northern outpost. United forces crushed one consular army after another, carving a clear path toward the snowy peaks of the Alps and the freedom they longed for. But why, at the crucial moment, just one step from safety, did this seemingly invincible legion suddenly turn and charge back into the deadly trap of the peninsula? Italy's roads groan under the weight of an unprecedented march. A dense wall of gray dust blankets the horizon for miles, swallowing sunlight. 120,000 men, women, and children move as a single unbroken stream, grinding once safe imperial roads to dust. This is no longer a band of fugitive gladiators hiding in nighttime forests. Across the peninsula, a full-fledged mobile state rolls forward, complete with traveling forges, heavy supply wagons, and harsh internal laws. The scale of this migration rivals the population of a great ancient metropolis suddenly uprooted. The crash of wooden carts, the whinnying of hundreds of captured horses, and the steady march of armed columns merge into a deafening roar that echoes through the deep valleys. The Senate scrambles to gather legions, facing a frightening truth. This nomadic nation could erase the eternal city from the map. But beneath this massive number hides a poison ready to tear the state apart from within. Behind the iron discipline lies a deep, unyielding ideological rift. The Thracian looks north, beyond the snowy alpine ridges, where he sees the only chance for true freedom, and a path back home. Yet his closest ally, a powerful Gaul named Crassus, has a very different vision. For him, freedom means total revenge. Crassus wants to unleash all their gathered strength on the Republic's capital, to drown its marble palaces in blood, and make the patricians feel the raw pain they have inflicted on conquered peoples for centuries. The clash between these two leaders turns deadly. 30,000 of the most fierce warriors, blinded by their thirst for revenge, break away from the main army, to taking with them a huge part of the uprising's striking power. The price for this blinding arrogance comes fast and without mercy. At the foot of Mount Gargan, the fractured army of Crixus clashes with the cold, calculating Roman war machine. Uncontrolled rage crashes against the disciplined ranks of legionnaires. The Romans systematically, like harvesting a bloody crop, wipe out the rebels line by line. 30,000 men lie dead on blood-soaked ground, turning the picturesque slopes into a vast slaughterhouse. Thousands of years later, archaeologists will uncover massive mass graves here, silent witnesses to the scale of that massacre. The severed head of the Gallic chieftain becomes a grim trophy for the imperial commanders, while news of the squad's utter destruction by heavy lead weighs heavily on the shoulders of the remaining rebels. This disaster turns into the harshest but most vital lesson for the leader of the rebels. The tragedy at Crix proves an unshakable truth. Blind fury without cold discipline leads straight to death. Forged from grief, Spartacus crafts a new strategy. He pushes his main force further north, transforming sorrow into calculated cold strategy. The Republic sends 2 fresh consular armies to intercept, expecting an easy victory over a demoralized enemy. Instead, Roman commanders stumble into expertly laid traps. The rebels crush both legions one after the other, keeping them from joining forces. Burned banners of the consuls smolder on dusty northern roadsides, trampled under thousands of calloused feet. The pass lies wide open. Ahead rise the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the Alps. Beyond them, lands beyond the Senate's control. The goal is reached. Now the thousands can finally vanish into the free forests of Gaul, disappearing forever beyond the borders of the hated empire. A cold mountain wind lashes the faces of the vanguard, carrying the sense of foreign, safer lands. The border lies just ahead. Only a few grueling miles stand between them and salvation. Then, something shatters all military logic. A vast, battle-hardened army, bloodied and battered to earn its place at these mountains, suddenly halts. For reasons still unknown, the troops pivot 180 degrees and charge back south, straight into the heart of Italy. This fateful choice remains the greatest mystery of ancient history. The Senate, granted an unexpected reprieve, recognizes the failure of ordinary generals and hands absolute power to Rome's wealthiest and most ruthless politician. Ahead lies a decisive battle. The rebels will fight not for elusive freedom, but for an honorable death. But can they break free from the trap when a new enemy builds an 80-mile wall in their path, and the only fleet that could save them strikes from behind? The marble halls of the Senate ooze with a sticky fear. The Republic's once invincible war machine has faltered. In a moment of utter desperation, the patricians turn to the only force that can buy salvation. Command shifts to Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome. He's not just a seasoned general, he's a ruthless financial mastermind whose personal wealth outstrips the budgets of entire states. While regular consular legions scatter at the mere sight of gladiators' swords, Crassus chooses to drown the problem in gold. He funds a massive army out of his own pocket, turning the rebellion's suppression into a grand investment. His goal isn't just military victory, it's total domination and limitless political power, something he's willing to crush anything to achieve. The new army trembles at rumors of the ruthless rebels, invincible and merciless. The commander makes a chilling decision. He needs his soldiers to fear him more than the enemy's blades. From the shadows of ancient times, a forgotten punishment rises: decimation. The lot cruelly selects every 10th legionnaire from the units that fled the battlefield. The remaining 9 must beat their comrade to death with heavy wooden clubs. The dull thuds of bone breaking, the screams of pain, and the dying gasps of their own brothers crush the survivors' minds forever. Blood on the hands of Roman infantrymen becomes the unbreakable cement of absolute discipline. The raw terror in Crassus's cold gaze crushes any thoughts of desertion. Cornered at the southern tip of the Apennine Peninsula, the rebel leader realizes a direct clash with this fanatical death machine means total annihilation. He needs an urgent escape. The only path to survival runs through the salty sea. The rebels strike a desperate deal with the Cilician pirates, the undisputed criminal masters of the Mediterranean. A vast share of captured Roman gold changes hands, landing in the pockets of these sea mercenaries. The plan is clear. The pirate fleet must evacuate the 1,000-strong army from the coast and ferry them to Sicily. There, on the fertile island crowded with disgruntled slaves, they can ignite the flames of a new, even more devastating war. Salvation feels just within reach, if only they can reach the shore and wait for the dark sails on the horizon. At the end of this short route to the rescue ships, A massive steel trap snaps shut. Crassus has no intention of chasing the fugitives through dense forests. Instead, he chooses to lock them inside an impenetrable geographic cage. Across the entire peninsula from one sea to the other, Roman engineers build an enormous barrier. An 80-kilometer ditch, several meters deep and wide, cuts through the earth. Just beyond it, an unbreakable palisade of thick logs rises up. This monumental structure rivals the longest modern highways, yet it was carved out by the calloused hands of legionnaires in mere weeks. A vast crowd of people, women and children among them, find themselves trapped on a tiny patch of land. Their food supplies dwindle quickly. Cold winds cut through to the bone, and ahead looms a solid wooden wall, sealing them off from the waiting fleet. Hunger and the relentless march of approaching legions set the brutal rules. When a fierce winter storm finally breaks, thick snow and icy rain blinding the Roman sentries, the rebels launch a desperate all-or-nothing assault. They throw bundles of brushwood, earth, and even the bodies of their fallen comrades into the deep ditch, clawing up the slippery rampart in a frenzy that feels almost primal. Then the impossible happens. The once impenetrable defensive line shatters. The exhausted army breaks through and races toward the long-awaited shore. Faces strain into the stormy haze, hoping to spot the saving masts of ships. But the horizon lies empty. Eerily so. The Cilician pirates have coldly taken the vast treasure and vanished, leaving Spartacus's army trapped in a deadly snare on the frozen sand. Pinned against the icy sea, betrayed by all, cut off from any chance of retreat? What desperate move will the rebel leader make when he realizes the only way out is to cut straight through the enemy's heart and kill their commander? A thick pre-dawn haze cloaks the jagged shore at the southern tip of the boot. Behind, the icy surf roars, swallowing the last hope of rescue along with the vanished sails of the Cilician mercenaries. Ahead, an unbreakable steel wall forms. The legions of Marcus Crassus, sealing off every land route without mercy. The rebel camp lies shrouded in a heavy, ringing silence on its final day. There are no warming fires, no loud orders from commanders. Over 100,000 exhausted slaves, old men and children among them, fully grasp the harsh geometry of their situation. They are trapped in a dead end. The air hangs thick with damp salt, the scent of rusting iron, and a bitter sense of impending doom that stiffens muscles. Every moment until the first rays of sun stretches into a torturous eternity. This freezing night becomes a last refuge for those who dared to break the ancient world's age-old chains. They traded slow decay and underground quarries for a brief, blinding flash of freedom. And now they must pay the ultimate price for that choice. Dawn shatters the darkness, flooding the valley by the Silar River with light. The rebel chief steps forward, leading his magnificent warhorse before the silent ranks. The animal shifts nervously, its hooves tapping in the tense stillness, aware of the gaze from tens of thousands of eyes. The Thracian draws a heavy blade. With one sharp, ruthless strike, he ends the noble steed's life. Its body collapses heavily onto the frozen ground. This shocking gesture speaks louder than any fiery speech. The commander shows his soldiers an unbreakable truth. There's no retreat. Ahead lies only victory or death. If they win the coming slaughter, they'll claim the best horses in the enemy cavalry. But if they lose, running won't save a single one of them. Destroying their precious mounts turns a scattered crowd of doomed men into a united machine fueled by sheer desperation. The soldiers know their leader will share every muddy step with them, fighting on foot, shoulder to shoulder with the most vulnerable infantry. The clash doesn't erupt as a chaotic crash of two massive forces. Instead, it unfolds as one giant surgical strike. An army of former slaves forms a tight wedge, what the Romans called a cuneus. The point aims straight for the heart of the enemy lines, their obsessive goal to carve a living corridor for their leader. Every unit charges at the solid shields of the Roman tortoise formation with one mission: break through to the commander. Spartacus leads this desperate surge himself, aiming to decapitate the punitive machine with a single crushing blow. The collision of bodies sparks a deafening screech of bending metal and a primal roar that drowns out the river's rush. The rebels tear through iron scales with bare hands, hurl themselves onto spears, forging a path over the bodies of fallen comrades. The Thracian fights through the dense ranks of centurions, leaving a wide trail of defeated foes behind, relentlessly closing in on Crassus's gilded armor. The distance to the coveted target shrinks to just a few dozen steps, but training wins out over desperate courage. Heavy infantry closes ranks, cutting the rebel leader off from the bulk of his forces. Surrounded on all sides by gleaming steel, he keeps delivering devastating blows even after a hostile spear pierces his thigh. In this raging crucible of violence, the hero drops to one knee, shield battered, fighting until the battle swallows him whole. When the dust settles over the blood-soaked valley, the victors methodically overturn tens of thousands of ravaged bodies, searching for their greatest prize. Yet the remains of the state's fiercest enemy vanish without a trace, lost forever in an anonymous mass grave. The rebellion was crushed brutally. The powerful general prepared to celebrate his triumph. But what monstrous price would the Senate demand for its own primal fear? And why would the true victor in this war be someone other than the one who ordered 6,000 surviving prisoners to be crucified along the Appian Way? 200 miles of paved road stretching from Capua to the very heart of the empire, transformed into a never-ending corridor of agony. 6,000 wooden crosses line the empire's main artery, the famous Appian Way. On each one, a captured gladiator or runaway slave slowly died. For weeks, muffled groans of the crucified echoed along the roadside, mingling with the creak of heavy carts and the clatter of hooves. Vultures swirled in dense black flocks overhead, blotting out the light. The stench of rotting flesh soaked into the roadside dust, turning the stomach of every traveler. The Senate staged this grim display not for abstract justice. That endless line of crosses, set against a blood-red sunset, sent one unmistakable message. The ruling system methodically showcased its monopoly on violence, aiming to scorch the very idea of rebellion out of people's minds. Meanwhile, a completely different drama unfolded in the marble halls of power, one steeped in sharp political irony. Marcus Crassus had poured a fortune into crushing the rebellion. His soldiers slogged through bloody mud for weeks, risking their lives in brutal battles. He was ready to reap the rewards of a monumental victory, but the ambitions of the billionaire shattered when another general appeared out of nowhere. Gnaeus Pompey the Great, returning triumphantly from his campaign in Spain with fresh troops, stumbled upon the scattered remnants of Crassus's fleeing forces. After wiping out this exhausted vanguard, Pompey sent a bold message to the capital. He claimed that while Crassus had merely defeated the enemy in open battle, he was the one who uprooted the war itself. The glory of savior of the fatherland, laurel wreaths, and the boundless adoration of the crowd went to the man who dealt the final blow. The richest patrician in the empire found himself publicly humiliated, his grand celebration reduced to a modest round of applause. Official records rushed to declare the conflict over, but the true legacy of the bloody uprising didn't lie in Senate decrees. The revolt forced Rome to rethink its stance on slavery and soften some laws, yet something far more terrifying took hold for the slave owners. An irreversible psychological shift. A deep primal fear settled permanently in the lavish villas of the patricians. Every aristocrat drifting to sleep in their spacious bedrooms, now strained to catch footsteps outside their doors. The Romans had confronted a chilling truth. Their deadliest enemy didn't lurk beyond snowy mountain peaks or stormy seas. It lived right under their own roof. At the same time, in dark cellars and stifling barracks, a burning idea took root. The thought that heavy chains could be broken spread like a virus, undermining the very foundation of ancient society. The fallen leader stopped being just a historical figure when his body disappeared forever in an unmarked mass grave by the Silar River. The missing corpse played a cruel trick on the victors, turning their dead commander into an immortal myth. Spartacus's name became a secret password for all the oppressed, a timeless symbol of fierce resistance against any form of tyranny. Centuries later, deep in the damp, twisting catacombs beneath Rome, the first Christians would scratch secret inscriptions about freedom like Spartacus's on the walls. The image of a hero who dared to defy a mighty empire for the sacred right to not be someone else's property outlived even the fall of Rome itself. The legend proved tougher than polished marble and sharper than a hardened sword. The finale of this monumental tragedy isn't measured by the number of fallen centurions or the count of wooden stakes driven into the ground. 120,000 lives were thrown into the ravenous furnace of a hopeless war. This was the highest price paid for a brief, dazzling spark of independence. Yesterday's slaves traded a slow fade away in dusty quarries for the right to die holding weapons in their hands. They proved the human spirit can resist, even when the odds hit absolute zero. Their shattered army vanished from the face of the earth, but it left behind a powerful echo, one no dictatorship could silence. The idea of freedom, once unleashed onto the sunlit sand of the arena, could not be nailed to a cross.